Hi, I'm Alicia Lucetti, and I am a privacy program manager at LinkedIn. And I'm also going to be your moderator today for this privacy and poverty law session. We have two amazing speakers with us today. First, we have Michele Gilman, who is a Venable Professor of Law at the University of Baltimore School of Law. We also have Mary Madden, who is a Senior Fellow at the Joan Gans Cooney Center. Both Michele and Mary are also affiliates with the Data and Society Research Institute in New York, as well as nationally recognized experts on privacy, technology, and low-income groups. Their research has been published in the New York Times, Data and Society, as well as multiple law journals. And you can find these resources actually on this page after this presentation. So today we're really here to discuss their upcoming research about how data-centric technologies are affecting the public at large. So welcome, Michele and Mary.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So to get started, I know I kind of mentioned what your upcoming research is about, but can you tell us a little bit more about the project that you're currently working on?
Yes, thank you so much, Alicia, and we really appreciate the opportunity. I am a advisor for Data Privacy Day, and so I have a selfish stake in the importance of this day. I think it's fantastic that you all are doing this event and making it so accessible to everyone around the world. So this project that we are working on for Data and Society is really an outgrowth of our work that we've been doing for several years now, looking at the intersection of economic inequality and privacy and surveillance. So our previous work, which was largely based on a nationally representative survey and then a law review article that we did, was looking at really the matrix of vulnerabilities that low-income communities face, and both within the context of how there's been historical disproportionate surveillance, but then also understanding what the differences are in their tech use and their attitudes towards privacy, and then also what some of the emerging sort of data-driven decision-making tools are that might have a disproportionate impact on important outcomes in their lives. And so this latest project that we're working on is really sort of the extension into the current moment and living through the pandemic. As Michele and I started to talk about what the impact of this would be through the lens of those who have the least resources in our society, we started to realize that really there was a lot of attention being paid to contact tracing technologies. And at the beginning of the pandemic, most of the sort of inertia of that debate was focused on the mechanics of that and how could we get people to use it and enough people to use it that it would be effective. But meanwhile, Michele and I were having conversations talking about more of the long tail of some of more of the everyday technologies that were being deployed both in schools and workplaces, and sort of this emergency mindset that was emerging for increased surveillance as more and more of us are online all the time, but also that there was sort of this overlap between low-income communities both experiencing physically more of the negative impacts of the pandemic, but then also the greater burden of being the ones who are on the front lines as workers, and sort of the experimental nature of a lot of the surveillance technologies that were being used to ensure social distancing, mask compliance, et cetera. And then the same for kids who are in school, whether they were physically in school or online. And so we started to look into that and think about the ways in which these data trails might have long-term impacts well after the pandemic and the immediate emergency subsides.
Yeah, and so just to follow up, two other trends, in addition to surveillance that we've been looking at, are the collapse of automated public benefit systems and the ways that digital profiling will harm low-income communities long after the public health crisis recedes, which cannot come soon enough for all of us. So just to talk briefly about the collapse of automated systems that manage public assistance programs, this was really most acute when it came to unemployment insurance. unemployment agencies in recent years have really underinvested in staff. And then when this crisis hit and so many millions of people were out of work, the agencies then had to rely on technology that simply could not keep up with the demand. And as a result, there are millions of eligible workers still waiting to receive their unemployment insurance benefits after months and months of making an initial claim. I saw estimates this week that only 60% of Americans who filed for unemployment benefits are receiving them. And this is people's rent money. This is how they pay for food, right? And it's not only an issue of government failure, but these are often systems that are designed and maintained by private contractors. So it's also an issue of privatization. We're also concerned, as I mentioned, about digital profiling. So in the wake of the pandemic, the markers of economic distress, such as evictions, unpaid credit cards, utility shutoffs, are becoming permanently embedded in people's digital profiles. In turn, this profiling will limit the ability of people to regain their financial footing. Again, even after the pandemic is in our rearview mirror, lenders, employers, landlords, and other entities will be penalizing people based on their digital footprints, as captured in a variety of consumer reports, and this will lead to people being denied access to basic goods and services and opportunities that they need for financial stability and security.
Now, digging in a little deeper about digital profiling and the AI and the algorithms behind that, I guess, how can those types of algorithms negatively impact these low-income groups?
Sure, I'll start by giving you a feel for what I'm seeing happening on the ground. I direct a law clinic at a law school where my students represent low-income people in Baltimore, Maryland. So here are some things that I'm seeing. We're representing a family now in which the father was out of work for a significant period of time due to the pandemic. The family, not surprisingly, fell behind on rent, and the landlord sought to evict them. We were able to secure their housing temporarily due to the CDC moratorium, which expires at the end of January. However, their rent continues to accrue, and regardless of how this case resolves, and we do have some possible defenses here, the simple fact of this eviction filing will have been scraped by tenant screening companies. Mm-hmm. And in turn, this negative mark on their rental history will be folded into tenant screening reports and then impact their ability to rent a home or possibly to obtain a mortgage in the future. Another and related concern that I have involves my clients with criminal records. Under laws in every state, certain criminal records can be expunged. And this is a huge benefit for reducing the collateral consequences of having criminal records. Expungement can open doors to housing, jobs, and education. But here's the problem. Once the records are scraped by data brokers, it's very difficult to put the cat back in the bag because the records exist out there in cyberspace and they get folded again into this wide variety of consumer reports used by employers and lenders and educators and landlords. Final problem, excuse me, that I'll mention is the digital targeting of people who are identified as financially vulnerable. This targeting is the flip side of the exclusionary effects that I already mentioned. We see clients ensnared in predatory payday loans that they obtained online because such loans are actually barred in my state. I've also had clients who've been lured into for-profit colleges by online lead generators, which are companies that troll for potential applicants and collect their personal data for-profit schools, who then in turn often use deceptive marketing tactics to get students to enroll. These students often take out massive loans with few job opportunities and rarely graduate. So I could give many, many more examples, and I won't for the sake of time, but just to summarize, what I'm seeing here on the ground is that the datafication of modern life disproportionately harms low-income people. in the form of exclusion from opportunities, targeting by predatory companies, and omnipresent surveillance in their daily lives.
And I would just add to that, thank you, Michele. So much of what Michele sees on the ground with her clients is also backed up by national opinion research, both by the work that we did and others in this space, showing that contrary to stereotypes, low-income people have a higher level of concern about all of these issues, but also a much lower level of confidence in their ability to navigate these challenges, right? So this idea of privacy increasingly becoming a luxury good is truly played out when you think about the amount of time and resources that it takes to correct erroneous, data or decision making. It's simply not possible for people who are just concerned with keeping food on the table to invest that amount of time. Not everyone has a Michele Gilman by their side to defend them, right? And so, I think it's also continuously striking to me to think about the ways in which these digital privacy concerns overlap with people's physical privacy and security concerns in their daily lives. And so it's important, I think, for people who are designing technology to keep that context in mind, that, when you live in a community where you are constantly concerned about law enforcement surveillance and unfair targeting, you are bringing that context also into the way that you use your digital devices. We see this borne out in the research. People have, low-income families, people of color have much higher levels of concern about unfair targeting, and people are bringing those assumptions and attitudes to their technology choices and practices. And so I think we know that there is an opportunity, I think, here for greater care and attention being brought to these issues now that we are sort of several years in, I would say, to sort of this techning, as people sometimes refer to it. We know that there's great momentum in the industry to improve a lot of these tools, and we're really excited to think about engaging people in your community to chart a path forward.
Wonderful. So touching on, you mentioned how people in low-income groups, they have this high concern about their privacy, but they're not really able to help change that information or even understand settings or specific targeting. What can companies and really specifically privacy professionals do to help overcome that societal impact and help make it easier for people to make these privacy decisions for themselves?
That's a great question. I have a few ideas. My first idea is, please don't assume that everyone experiences technology in cyberspace in the same way. And we need to be sensitive to how different groups engage and experience technology. So take, for instance, facial recognition technology, which has really been in the headlines quite a bit lately. Property owners are starting to install this form of technology in their buildings. Affluent people seem to like this service because there's a gee whiz factor surrounding new technology. It makes them feel safe and secure in their buildings. By contrast, several low-income residents of buildings where this technology has been deployed have voiced very serious concerns around it. They're concerned about their data being shared with law enforcement. They're concerned about the enhanced opportunities this gives for landlords to generate evidence for evictions. Mm-hmm. One commentator that I read described these differing perspectives as luxury surveillance versus imposed surveillance. And I think that's a very helpful framing. It really shows that technology itself is not neutral. It is socially embedded in a very specific context, and we need to be sensitive to that. I would also urge this community to see people who've been traditionally marginalized as potential consumers, potential employees, as real stakeholders in the use and development of technology. These are communities that should be engaged in the design of technology and in the feedback process. At the same time, we need to ensure diversity in the teams that make decisions about technology deployment and the teams that design technology and program it. This is yet another way to ensure that multiple viewpoints are engaged in the process from start to finish. And finally, from my perspective, it's also important not to forget that the digital divide still exists. This really came to the fore in the research that Mary and I are doing right now. The pandemic has painfully revealed that millions of minority, rural, and low-income people still lack access to reliable broadband. Broadband is so necessary to access education, work, healthcare, public benefits. So we all need to pull together and provide and advocate for connecting all Americans into these essential digital networks. We all benefit from that. And so that should be another area of focus, in my opinion. And I know Mary has many more ideas, so I'll turn that over to her.
No, I think that's fantastic, and +1 to everything Michele said. But I also, would just add that I do think there's a real opportunity for companies to elevate privacy as a key feature and asset that differentiates them in the marketplace. I think there's a growing demand among consumers to be able to trust, and we're reaching a point where privacy is so complex that yes, there are some features that can be managed by the individual, but ultimately we are trusting brands. We are trusting companies at the network level to make very complex decisions about how they manage our information. And so, I think from the individual perspective, there are opportunities to design interfaces that sort of reduce the friction, that slows down the process of enacting privacy preferences, right? Like, let's design, tools that are not public by default, et cetera, and, perhaps give people ways to sort of enact profile-based preferences over time based off of their behavior or preferences. I think that's an area where there can be a lot more innovation. I also think there's some real low-hanging fruit with respect to, basic purpose limitations, drawing off of models like GDPR, limiting the sale of collected data, for one purpose to be reused for another. But beyond, I think, data collection itself, there's really an increasing need for guidelines about how that information can then be used in critical decision-making areas, right? So we're not so concerned about, how data gets used to display certain kinds of ads to folks. Like, yes, that's important, but we're really focused for low-income communities on sort of how data can control access to various pathways and gateways to advancement, whether it's education, employment, access to financial support, food, et cetera. And the fact that currently there is no pathway for accountability and support in that process when things go awry. And if we've learned anything over these years about the internet and about the data ecosystem, I think it's that it's unpredictable. It's full of insecurities and mistakes and hackers, right? I mean, there's a lot of messiness there that we like to overlook, and there's not a lot of support for individuals to be able to advocate on their own behalf when something goes wrong. And so I think we need, more design-based choices from those who are more aware of these differences that Michele mentioned, and the differing consequences, because quite frankly, the harms are much more complex when they are experienced by people who are already living in such an economically fragile state.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate your time. I'm very excited to read about your new project and your new research. For those that are also excited, it will be published on Data and Society in the next upcoming months. So definitely look out for Michele and Mary then. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Happy Data Privacy Day.
Have a wonderful day.